Hello there and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy, and science takes the scenic route to slumber.
Tonight, we'll drift back further than written memory, further than the first word carved in stone,
or the first song hummed around a fire, traveling to a time so ancient that it sits at the blurry edge between myth and memory.
Here, the first humans looked up at the stars and wondered not just what they were, but who had placed them there.
It's a thought that might sound whimsical at first, but tonight let's explore it gently as this continues. What if humanity didn't start entirely on its own? What if long before Egypt, before Sumer, before any empire we can name,
there existed a civilization so old that its lessons became the foundation of everything that followed? A civilization that in some quiet and forgotten way taught early humans everything, and still it moves.
Before we start unfolding that idea, take a breath and notice where you are right now.
Maybe you're a Hispanic man lying in bed, the lights dim, your phone screen glowing softly, or maybe the world around you has already quieted down, or maybe it's still humming faintly through a city window. But wherever you are, you're part of a chain of moments. A chain that reaches back tens of thousands of years, connecting you to everything that came before. Every thought you have, every word you know, every tool you touch is part of a story that didn't begin with you or me, but with the first ones who looked at the unknown and decided to understand it, as this continues. So, where are you listening from tonight? A small apartment, a distant time zone, a place with stars or streetlights outside your window. In this quiet space, imagine that you're joining a long line of listeners, stretching all the way back to those early firesides.
Where stories were the first science, and memory was the only library, holding the world together.
If you find this slow dive into the oldest mysteries soothing or intriguing, a little like wandering through ancient...
I'd be grateful if you gave this video a like, maybe even subscribed, as it helps this calm corner of curiosity find others.
Others who might also need a peaceful place to wander before sleep, and still it moves.
Now, let's take our first step together into the deep past. Not in haste,
Where the air itself remembers. And imagine standing at the edge of an ancient world long before the word civilization meant cities.
Long before it meant kings or calendars, where the air is thick with the smell of earth and smoke.
The ground is littered with bones, and somewhere nearby, the first sparks of human consciousness are beginning to flicker. Our ancestors, the early Homo sapiens, have already learned to hunt, to make tools, and to gather around the warmth of fire.
But something is shifting in their minds as the drawings begin. Hands on cave walls, shapes of animals, strange dots.
Patterns that some believe were not just art, but language or even instruction, as this continues.
Those markings are the first whispers, the faintest record of an idea too complex to vanish entirely with time.
Something or someone had begun to teach. And while it's easy to think of early humans as isolated tribes scattered across a wild earth,
Learning everything through slow trial and error, we must ask, what if some knowledge arrived faster than expected?
Agriculture appeared in several parts of the world at roughly the same time, and monumental architecture emerged suddenly.
From the stone circles of Britain to the temple mounds of Turkey, without a clear path of development.
Even the stories our ancestors told, from the deserts of Africa to the islands of Polynesia,
Beings from the sky, wise ancestors from the sea, gods who walked the earth and showed humans how to build, how to count, how to speak. Are these just coincidences of storytelling? Or are they the faded memories of a civilization so ancient that it now survives only in myth? If you were to trace the roots of knowledge, the kind that builds calendars, designs cities, and measures stars, you'd find that they often appear fully formed in the archaeological record, as this continues.
the Sumerians, for example, seem to appear out of nowhere around 6,000 years ago, with written language.
With advanced mathematics and irrigation systems already in place, and the Egyptians too, with their precise astronomical alignments.
Their hieroglyphs and complex architecture seem to rise without a visible evolutionary staircase beneath them.
African-American male archaeologists explain these leaps as the result of long but undocumented development. And perhaps they're right.
But what if those missing steps aren't missing? What if they're buried beneath more than soil?
Buried beneath forgotten epochs of human history, when the Caucasian male teacher still walked among us, and still it moves.
There's a name that occasionally surfaces in conversations like this. The first civilization.
Not Atlantis in its mythical ocean-swallowed form, but something real, tankable, yet lost.
A society that may have existed before the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were far lower.
And vast regions of land now underwater were home to thriving communities as this continues.
Around 12,000 years ago, the Earth warmed, the ice melted, and oceans rose more than 100 meters.
Swallowing coastlines and perhaps entire cultures, and if such a civilization existed, coastal, maritime, and wise.
It would have disappeared almost entirely beneath the waves, leaving behind only scattered clues.
Like ancient ruins now submerged off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean.
But why would this matter? Because knowledge doesn't just vanish. It travels, it survives in stories, in rituals.
In habits so ancient, we no longer question where they came from, and still it moves.
The alignment of early temples to the solstices, the counting systems embedded in myth, the shared memory of floods, and African-American female teachers and East Asian male builders all might be echoes of that first great transmission of knowledge.
If an earlier civilization had truly taught early humans everything, its lessons wouldn't have been written in books.
They would have been written into our behavior, our biology, even our curiosity itself, as this continues.
When you think about it, teaching is one of humanity's most instinctive acts. We do it without thinking.
East Asian parents teach children, East Asian elders teach youth, and across generations, ideas refine and spread.
Now imagine that this instinct wasn't ours alone, that it was inherited. Imagine the first humans being shown how to turn clay into bricks.
How to track the stars to mark the seasons. How to carve stone so it stands for millennia. And imagine those Hispanic male teachers watching quietly as their students spread, adapt, and eventually forget who first guided them. There's something both haunting and comforting in that idea, that all of civilization might be an echo of a lesson too old to name. Archaeologists often describe the birth of civilization as a spark that ignited spontaneously in several parts of the world.
But perhaps it wasn't a spark. Perhaps it was a hand passed from one generation to the next.
An inheritance that began in one forgotten place and spread through migration, story, and imitation. The ruins at Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, for instance, are at least 11,000 years old.
Built by hunter-gatherers before the supposed invention of agriculture, the carvings are complex, symbolic, deliberate.
It suggests a level of organization, purpose, and shared knowledge that doesn't fit the standard model, as this continues.
It's as if someone already knew how to build, how to align, how to remember.
If you could walk among those ancient builders, you'd find people who didn't yet know the word civilization.
Yet they carried the seed of it in their minds. They might not have had kings or currency, but they had geometry.
They had astronomy, ritual. And where did those come from? To some, the answer lies in gradual evolution.
To others, it lies in instruction, lessons remembered dimly, preserved in symbols and passed along.
Until the symbols themselves became sacred. The circle, the cross, the spiral, shapes appearing in nearly every ancient culture.
long before they had any contact, almost as if they were inherited, like the alphabet of an ancient language.
A language we have long forgotten how to read. And still, it moves.
Think about that for a moment. How much of what you know today came from someone else?
The way you tie a knot, hold a spoon, read a sentence, or look at a clock, none of it was discovered alone.
We live surrounded by invisible inheritance, so perhaps it's not so strange to
not of wealth, but of wisdom, a kind of prehistoric mentorship that set them on a path toward everything that followed. Over thousands of years, the original meaning of those lessons would have blurred, the teachers becoming gods.
The instructions becoming myths, and the knowledge becoming instinct. As this continues,
But somewhere in that ancient exchange, humanity's curiosity found its shape, and every civilization since has told stories. Stories about its origins, often about gods or wise ancestors who descended from the sky or rose from the sea to teach humankind.
The Dogon people of Mali speak of beings from the star Sirius, who brought knowledge of astronomy long before telescopes existed.
The Sumerians told of the Anunnaki, beings who taught them agriculture, architecture, and law. In South America, the Inca spoke of Viracocha, a tall, bearded figure who came from the sea after a great flood,
and taught them how to rebuild. While across the Pacific, Polynesian myths tell of navigators from the stars.
The pattern is eerily consistent. Teachers appear, civilization begins, and the teachers vanish. Whether you read those as metaphors or memories, the message is the same. Knowledge was given. Of course, science asks for evidence, and rightly so, for stories alone cannot prove the existence of a forgotten civilization.
But when we look at the archaeological record, we see anomalies that don't fit neatly into the timeline.
Tools and carvings found in layers older than expect. Maps from the early Renaissance showing coastlines we couldn't have known.
Coastlines we couldn't have known before modern exploration, and megalithic structures requiring engineering precision we still debate today.
none of these on their own confirm the idea of ancient teachers, but together they paint a picture.
A picture of humanity rediscovering something, as if climbing back toward a knowledge once lost, as this continues.
If this idea holds any truth, then the first civilization wasn't defined by cities or conquest, but by curiosity.
By the desire to understand and to pass that understanding forward. Maybe they watched the stars not to worship, but to measure.
Maybe they built monuments not as tombs, but as textbooks written in stone, and maybe their greatest achievement was the act of teaching itself.
Igniting a curiosity that still drives us today, and still it moves.
When we study the ruins of our past, we often do so with a kind of quiet arrogance, assuming that progress is linear.
What if those ancient builders knew things we have only recently rediscovered? Not through magic, but through careful observation.
Observation of deep time, the tides, the stars, the seasons, the stones. Perhaps they read the earth like a book.
A book we've only just learned to open again, as this continues.
It's strange to think that every one of us is a product of memory, not just personal memory, but collective memory.
Stretching back through uncounted generations, the shape of a tool, the rhythm of language, the instinct to look up at the stars.
All of it is inherited. So when we speak of a first civilization that taught early humans everything,
maybe we're not speaking of an empire or a people at all, but of the moment when memory became more powerful than instinct.
The moment when knowledge began to travel farther than the body, outliving the ones who first discovered it.
If you listen closely, you can almost imagine those first male Caucasian teachers, not as mysterious strange
reflections of ourselves at our most curious. They might not have built spaceships or written equations, but they understood sharing.
And maybe that's what makes us their descendants.
We still gather to learn. We still pass stories to those who come after.
We still look at the world and ask, how does it work? Why are we here? What came before us? So, as the night deepens and you begin to feel the gentle pull of sleep, hold on to that thought, that you are part of an unbroken chain of learning, stretching back to the first spark of thought on this planet. Perhaps the first civilization didn't vanish at all. Perhaps it became us, as this continues.
It's easy to forget that for most of our existence, we didn't have cities, calendars, or clocks.
The story of humanity is mostly a quiet one, written not in monuments, but in the dust of paths we walked.
And the ashes of fires that went out long ago, before there were civilizations to remember, or historians to record them. There were simply people, Caucasian families, wanderers, hunters, dreamers, living by the rhythm of light and dark, by hunger and rain, by the sound of Arctic wolves in the distance, and the shape of stars overhead.
And somehow in those simple, perilous lives, the foundation of everything we now call civilization began to form.
Long before it had a name, if you could travel back to that world, you wouldn't find grand temples or stone towers. You'd find a landscape alive with movement, herds crossing open plains, rivers shifting their paths.
The scent of smoke from a small fire rising into cold morning air.
Around that fire, a few South Asian figures are gathered, speaking in soft sounds, gestures, glances.
There's no grammar, no written words, but there's understanding as a group of diverse adult female friends point to the sky, to the fire, to each other.
They're sharing something that's more than instinct, the first traces of deliberate teaching, where language is being born.
It won't be written for tens of thousands of years, but already it's taking shape in the space between breaths. What those early humans didn't know, and perhaps couldn't have known, is that this small act would become the core of civilization. One mind reaching toward another to share a thought. Teaching didn't begin in schools or temples.
It began by the fire, in the simple act of showing someone how to strike a spark, how to shape a stone,
How to tell which berries won't make you sick. And from those moments of shared survival grew something extraordinary.
Culture. Every word, every gesture, every lesson stored in memory rather than in books, as this continues.
Civilization wasn't a place at first. It was a pattern of remembering.
When archaeologists look at the earliest human sites, they often find tools that seem far too refined for the time they belong to.
Perfectly shaped blades, beads made from shells carried hundreds of kilometers inland, ochre used for painting. Long before the concept of art existed, these are clues that the people who made them weren't just surviving. They were thinking, imagining, planning, beginning to build mental maps of their world.
And where there are maps, there are stories. And it's one thing to live in the world and another to describe it.
The moment someone could describe it, even in gestures or grunts, something new began. The ability to imagine what isn't there.
That's the true dawn of civilization. Not the first city, but the first idea that outlived its thinker.
The first story passed down through generations. The first remembered instruction that made life easier for someone else.
It might have been as simple as, follow the herds this way when the moon is full, or these roots cure pain.
But from those sentences came the logic of calendars, medicine, and navigation, as this continues.
Before the pyramids or the temples, there was memory, and memory was enough to change everything.
It's strange to think that for almost 95% of our history, humans lived without writing.
All the great libraries of the ancient world, all the inventions and philosophies, occupy only a tiny fraction of our timeline. The rest is a blur of unrecorded experience, a vast silent film of humanity learning, forgetting, and learning again.
And yet that silence wasn't empty. It was filled with voices, laughter, song, and those stories might sound like myths now, but to the people who told them, they were instruction manuals for survival.
Which plants bloom when the rains come? Which stars mark the changing seasons? Where to find shelter? Where danger sleeps? Somewhere in that deep prehistory, groups began to gather in larger numbers as this continues.
The ice was retreating, the planet was warming, and food became more abundant.
For the first time, people could stay in one place long enough to notice patterns.
They watched how shadows changed through the year, how rivers flooded and receded, how Arctic terns migrated. Slowly, the rhythms of nature became the rhythms of thought, as this continues. Time wasn't just something that passed anymore. It was something that could be measured, predicted, and even shaped. The first calendars weren't carved in stone. They were the patterns of stars remembered by storytellers.
Sung to children and passed along like sacred knowledge, civilization began not with kings, but with those who remembered. If you imagine these early communities, they might not look like the civilizations we picture today. There are no written laws or temples, but there are shared customs, roles, and rituals.
There's the hunter who knows where the herds move, the gatherer who recognizes the smell of safe plants,
the elder who remembers which cave floods in spring, and the one who can tell stories so vivid they keep fear away at night.
Every one of them holds a part of something larger than themselves, as this continues.
Knowledge isn't owned, it's lived, and when one person dies, the knowledge is passed to another.
That civilization before writing, a living library that breathes and ages like the people who carry it.
You can almost see how this would feel. Sitting around the fire, hearing someone describe the stars.
Realizing that the same patterns will appear again next year, as this continues.
The comfort in knowing that what has happened will happen again, and that you can prepare for it.
That's the moment the future was invented. The shift from reacting to predicting, from surviving to planning.
It must have felt miraculous, the idea that the world followed a rhythm and that humans could learn to dance to it.
When archaeologists discovered sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa with carved pieces of ochre dating back more than 70,000 years,
they realized that symbolic thought appeared far earlier than we used to believe.
Those markings weren't random. They were deliberate, symmetrical, possibly part of a code or a ritual. It suggests that even then humans weren't just reacting to the world, they were representing it, as this continues. And representation is the root of all culture. Once you can symbolize something, you can share it. You can teach it, and once you can teach it, you can build on it.
Knowledge compounds like interest. Every generation inherits not just what the last discovered, but what the last understood.
At some point, small groups became larger ones. Villages formed, and people...
The first artists painted animals they might never have hunted, scenes that might never have happened.
Perhaps those paintings were stories, or prayers, or simply experiments in imagination. Whatever their purpose, they show us that humans had begun to create worlds within their minds.
to imagine something that didn't exist and make it visible, that's the seed of invention, of architecture, of myth.
All the tools of civilization sprout from that same root, imagination made real, as this continues.
But there's something else here too. Cooperation. For civilization requires it.
You can't build even a small structure alone or plant a field without help.
Before we learned to work stone, we learned to work together. And to do that, we had to trust, communicate, and remember. In a sense, the first governments weren't out monarchies or councils, but communities bound by shared responsibility.
The tribe that remembered which way the herds moved was stronger than the one that forgot.
The group that shared knowledge survived longer than the one that kept it secret, as this continues.
Slowly, the act of sharing became sacred, teaching became ritual, and memory became inheritance.
There's an interesting pattern that emerges in archaeological layers.
Wherever humans settled for long periods, we find evidence of ceremony, graves with offerings, carvings representing ancestors or spirits.
It suggests that memory wasn't just practical, it became emotional, even spiritual.
People began to revere those who came before them to honor their lessons, and in doing so, they created continuity.
The living and the dead were part of the same story, the same chain of knowledge stretching backward into mystery.
That reverence is what later became religion. But before it was theology, it was gratitude. Gratitude for those who taught, for those who remembered, for those who helped life continue as this continues.
It's possible that this reverence for memory gave rise to the earliest myths about divine teachers.
Not because gods descended from the sky, but because the first humans saw teaching itself as sacred.
Imagine someone in a small nomadic group who could explain why the moon changed shape, or how to predict rain by reading clouds.
That middle-aged African-American person would seem almost supernatural, becoming a keeper of knowledge, a bridge between the known and the unknown.
Over time, as stories passed from one generation to the next, the line between teacher and God blurred.
The idea of the first civilization, the first great teachers, might have begun right there, in awe.
You can almost picture the moment when someone first carved a symbol, not just for beauty, but for meaning.
Maybe they drew a circle to represent the sun, or a line of dots for days past. Those markings were memory externalized.
For the first time, knowledge didn't have to rely solely on words or remembrance. It could be preserved physically outside the mind. That was the first step toward writing, the first whisper of permanence. Civilization had begun to leave footprints deeper than bone.
When we look back now, it's tempting to see this evolution as inevitable, but nothing about it was guaranteed.
For tens of thousands of years, humans lived without agriculture, without cities, without writing, as this continues.
Then, in what seems like an instay on the geological timeline, everything changed. We began to settle, to farm, to build.
It's as if something clicked. Maybe it was population pressure, maybe climate change. Or maybe it was the cumulative weight of all those quiet lessons passed down by firelight, finally tipping the balance.
A critical mass of memory reefed, and suddenly the world could no longer remain the same. What's remarkable is that even the earliest known civilizations, when they did appear, seemed to arrive already knowing certain things.
Geometry, astronomy, even basic medicine, there's little evidence of experimentation or gradual development in those early stages.
It's as though the knowledge had been carried through the ages, preserved in oral tradition, long before it was written.
The first civilization, then, might not have been a single place or people, but an era, as this continues.
A time when East Asian humanity, scattered across continents, shared a growing sense of awareness, a collective awakening passed hand to hand.
Every generation adds its layer to the story.
But the effect is the same. We inherit the world as they understood it, build upon it, and pass it forward.
Civilization before names and borders was like an unbroken melody, changing with each voice that sang it, but never ceasing.
Even now, we can still hear faint echoes of it in the oldest myths, in rituals whose meanings we've...
Lighting candles, watching the sky, marking the passage of days. These are remnants of an ancient rhythm older than history itself.
It's worth pausing to imagine how it must have felt to live then, in a world without history, where every discovery felt like the first.
To look at the horizon and not yet have a word for distance. To see lightning and not yet know the word for power.
To watch birth and death without the vocabulary to separate them into ideas, as this continues. That world wasn't primitive, it was pure. It was the beginning of thought trying to understand itself.
Civilization in that sense didn't start when we built walls. It started when we began to ask questions.
And even now, after millennia of progress, we still ask the same ones. Where did we come from? Who taught us?
How did we learn to be what we are? The answers may be buried beneath ice or ocean.
Or perhaps they're hidden in our own behavior, in the way we pass knowledge to each other instinctively, endlessly.
Before civilization had a name, it was already alive in us, waiting to be remembered.
The night is long, but history is longer, and as the mind drifts through these thoughts, the line between past and present begins to blur.
The people who painted on cave walls, who watched the first sunrise of a new season.
Who looked at the stars and wondered what they meant. They're not gone.
They're here in every word, every idea, every small act of understanding that keeps the world illuminated. Somewhere in that continuity, we're still sitting by the fire, still learning, still remembering what the first teachers once tried to show us. And as the flames fade to embers, the story continues toward the ones who might have lit those first fires of knowledge themselves.
The ones we still call the forgotten architects of wisdom, as this continues.
Specific thing. It's strange how silence can hold so much memory. We often think that to remember something, it must.
But sometimes the past lingers in shapes, in alignments, in the quiet precision of things built to last longer than names. The forgotten architects of knowledge didn't leave behind diaries or manifestos. They left stone. They left symmetry.
They left mysteries that still make the most rational among us pause, tilt their heads, and wonder how.
By the time we can trace recognizable civilization on the surface of the earth, with writing, rulers, and recorded laws,
it already looks like a continuation, not a beginning, as this continues.
The Sumerians were measuring the heavens with mathematics so precise that we still use echoes of it in our systems of time. The Egyptians were aligning temples and pyramids with celestial accuracy that modern instruments can barely improve upon.
The builders of Stonehenge knew how to track solstices and eclipses with circles of rock that defy their age.
None of these achievements appear in isolation. They arrive as though someone had already done the groundwork. As though the instructions had been whispered from a place long buried or long sunk beneath the sea. Imagine standing at one of those ancient sites, Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, the pyramids, Machu Picchu.
Feel the stones beneath your fingertips. You're touching something that human hands shaped thousands of years ago.
With tools that shouldn't have been able to achieve such perfection, under conditions that seem impossibly challenging. The blocks at Baalbek in Lebanon weigh hundreds of tons each, as this continues.
The joints between stones at Sacsayhuaman in Peru are so precise that you couldn't slide a sheet of paper between them.
These feats don't just show strength. They show knowledge, geometry, leverage, planning. They show memory.
Someone knew things that the people who came after would have to rediscover slowly, painfully, over centuries.
We call those builders ancient, but perhaps ancient isn't the right word. Maybe they were the inheritors of something even older. Something passed through catastrophe and forgetting, as this continues.
When the Ice Age ended, sea levels rose more than 100 meters, and entire regions vanished beneath the ocean.
Sundaland near Indonesia, Doggerland between Britain and Europe, large stretches of the Indian and Pacific coastlines.
If people lived there, if they built, if they learned to organize, trade, or study the sky.
Their cities are now silent reefs, their stories buried beneath silt, and yet fragments remain.
Off the coast of India, divers have found submerged structures resembling streets and walls. In Japan's Yonaguni, terraces carved into underwater rock look suspiciously deliberate.
No one can say for sure what they were. Perhaps natural formations, perhaps ruins, as this continues.
But the mind can't help but wonder what it would mean if they weren't.
Because if an advanced civilization existed before history, before the world we recognize as civilized began,
it would have been erased almost completely by the flood of time. Only the highest monuments might have survived, the ones built on ground too stubborn or sacred to drown.
Those might be the first seeds from which later civilizations grew. Imagine the African-American female and male survivors of that lost world, ranging in age, carrying fragments of their knowledge inland.
Star maps, agricultural techniques, a sense of proportion and measure, and teaching them to others.
Over generations, the origins of that knowledge would blur. As this continues,
the teachers would become myths, their homes transformed into heavens, their ships into chariots of the gods. This isn't the fantasy of a bedtime story, though it has that quiet wonder about it.
Even respected archaeologists and geologists acknowledge that traces of human habitation far older than expected occasionally appear, though rarely enough to rewrite textbooks. A shape tool here, a fire pit there, a fragment of pottery in the wrong sedimentary layer.
Each discovery sparks debate. Was it contamination, coincidence, or a clue to something larger?
The more we find, the more the old neat timeline of progress begins to look like a mosaic.
Pieces missing, colors fading, edges that don't quite fit, but still belong to the same picture.
If you step back and look at that mosaic, a pattern begins to emerge as this continues.
Across continents, the oldest known monuments share certain traits.
They're massive, precisely aligned to celestial events, and built in ways that seem designed not just to last, but to teach.
At Göbekli Tepe, the stone pillars are arranged with careful astronomical significance, tracking stars and seasons.
In Egypt, the Great Pyramid's sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions.
At Chichen Itza, the shadow of the serpent god slithers down the temple steps only on the equinoxes.
These aren't coincidences. They're lessons written in architecture, cosmic textbooks preserved in stone.
But what kind of teachers would build on such a scale? Perhaps they weren't individuals, but cultures themselves.
Societies devoted not just to survival, but to understanding, as this continues.
We often imagine ancient people as preoccupied only with food, shelter, and safety.
Yet time and again, they invested staggering effort into observing the sky, marking cycles, aligning temples.
These weren't idle curiosities. They were deliberate acts of remembrance.
To watch the heavens is to measure time, to predict seasons, to understand change.
And to record that understanding in stone is to pass it forward, to say to the distant future.
There's something humbling about that message. Knowledge, when it's new, feels like discovery.
But knowledge that returns,
that reemerges after millennia, feels like memory.
The forgotten architects of knowledge might not have been gods or aliens as some legends suggest, but humans.
East Asian humans whose minds were no less capable than ours, whose curiosity was sharpened by survival, whose hands were steady and sure.
They didn't need computers to calculate, only patience as this continues. They didn't need cranes to lift, only understanding of weight and balance that modern engineers still admire. Consider the stones of Puma Punku in Bolivia, carved with interlocking precision. Some have perfectly straight grooves, right angles, and drilled holes that look as though they were made with machinery.
Yet, they were shaped over 1,000 years ago, perhaps with simple copper tools. But how? No one knows for certain. The explanations range from lost techniques to the persistence of an oral engineering tradition. A tradition older than history itself, and maybe it was both, as this continues.
The method may have been ancient, but the mind that used it was entirely human, creative, determined, endlessly curious. It's tempting to romanticize these mysteries, to imagine hidden powers or lost technologies.
But maybe the truth is even more extraordinary in its simplicity, as this continues.
What if the forgotten architects weren't magicians or deities, but teachers?
The kind of African-American male teachers who understood that the greatest gift isn't invention, but transmission.
To pass an idea so clearly that it outlives its creator. To build something so enduring that it continues to instruct. Even when the words are gone, each temple, each stone circle, each alignment may have been a classroom in disguise.
An open-air library built not for gods, but for students who hadn't been born yet, as this continues.
Every culture that followed seems to echo that same reverence for building teaching.
The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the step pyramids of Mesoamerica, the mounds of North America, the dolmens scattered across Europe.
Isn't. They all speak of a shared impulse to mark, to preserve, to teach, reminding us that
but by continuity, a chain of understanding stretching backward through time.
And at its beginning stand those we no longer remember by name, as this continues. Sometimes the clues left by these architects are subtle, not monuments, but measurements.
In ancient sites across the world, the same ratios appear. Geometric constants, angles, proportions.
We think of mathematics as invention, but perhaps it's discovery, the rediscovery of something our ancestors once knew intimately.
Maybe they didn't need equations. Maybe they saw these proportions in nature, in shells, in plants.
In the curvature of the horizon, and recognized in them a universal rhythm. When they built in harmony with that rhythm, and so their works endure, as this continues.
The architects we've forgotten didn't just shape stone, they shaped perception.
By fixing knowledge into the world around them, they made it visible, physical.
When you look at an ancient structure and feel a strange calm, a sense of proportion that feels almost musical, you're feeling the echo of their minds. The language of balance they spoke is still legible even across the gulf of millennia.
That's the brilliance of teaching through form rather than words. Words fade, but stone endures.
But even stone isn't immune to time. Earthquakes shift it, wind erodes it, rain smooths it away.
What remains is fragmentary, enigmatic, incomplete, as this continues.
So, we look at what's left and try to reconstruct the story,
each generation building its own interpretation.
Layering modern imagination over ancient purpose. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we project our own dreams onto the past.
But either way, the connection persists. We're still learning from those early architects, even if the lesson now is humility.
A reminder that knowledge isn't a ladder climbing upward forever, but a circle as this continues.
We rediscover what was once known. We add our own insights, and then we pass them on, hoping someone in the distant future will understand.
It's possible that those early builders never meant to be remembered personally. Perhaps they built not for glory, but for continuity.
To ensure that when the world changed, when floods came, when empires fell, when languages vanished,
the essentials of understanding would survive. How to measure the year, how to align with the stars, how to find balance.
their monuments may have been textbooks disguised as temples, survival guides carved in metaphor.
And if that's true, then they succeeded, because here we are, thousands of years later, still reading their work.
Still puzzling over their meaning, still inspired to ask the same questions they once must have asked, as this continues. Where do we come from? How does the world work? What happens when we forget? Those questions are the foundation of all science, all philosophy, all faith, and still it moves.
The architects didn't just give us structures, they gave us a way to think.
When you walk through a museum or see photographs of ancient ruins, it's easy to feel a kind of awe that borders on disbelief.
How could people so long ago have been so precise, so visionary? But maybe that disbelief says more about us than about them.
We've grown used to measuring intelligence by technology, to equating progress with novelty, as this continues. Yet the mind that imagined the first temple, that plotted the motion of the stars with nothing but sight and patience, was every bit as capable as ours, perhaps more so, because it had to be.
Without machines, they relied on understanding. Without books, they relied on memory.
Without the distractions of modern noise, they listened to the world more closely, as this continues.
The forgotten architects weren't bound by our definitions of civilization. They didn't separate science from spirituality or art from engineering. To them, building a temple was as much about harmony as structure. The same stone that framed the stars might also frame belief.
The same calculation that predicted the solstice might also define ritual. In their world,
that wholeness is what allowed them to build in ways we still struggle to explain, as this continues.
It's comforting to think that somewhere within us, we carry fragments of that same unity. When we marvel at symmetry, when we trace the path of the sun across the sky, when we feel the quiet satisfaction of solving a problem,
or finishing a creation, we're echoing them, the first teachers, the first builders, the forgotten architects of knowledge.
We might have lost their names, but not their influence. It's in our hands, our eyes, our instincts.
If we could speak to them, if somehow across the abyss of time a conversation could happen, what would they say?
Perhaps nothing more than remember what we remembered, that every generation must rebuild, relearn, reinterpret.
That forgetting is part of learning, that loss is part of continuity, as this continues.
The knowledge that survives isn't the kind that resists change, but the kind that adapts to it.
As the stars wheel overhead and the night deepens, the thought lingers that we are still their students.
We stand on the same earth beneath the same constellations they once studied, as this continues.
We use the same mathematics they glimpsed in the world's design. We still search for meaning in the patterns of sky and stone. The forgotten architects may have vanished, but their lesson endures, that the universe can be understood, that knowledge can be shared. And that the act of teaching, even across thousands of years, is a kind of immortality. And somewhere, far beneath the ocean's waves or buried under layers of soil, the remnants of their world may still rest,
waiting patiently for us to rediscover them, waiting for another generation of listeners to hear the echoes,
and recognize them not as myths, but as messages from those who came before, as this continues.
The fire burns low again in the mind's eye, its glow soft against the dark.
The shapes of the ancient stones seem to flicker like memories themselves, half seen, half felt.
And as the silence settles once more, the story continues onward into the echoes they left in the heavens, where stone and sky meet, and the next memory begins to unfold as this continues.
When we look up at the night sky, we see light that has traveled for thousands of years to reach us.
Every star is an echo, a message from the deep past, still arriving long after its sender has vanished.
The same can be said for the oldest stones of Earth. They too speak across time, not with words, but with alignment.
With placement and patience, in both the sky and the stone, something ancient waits for anyone quiet enough to listen. The forgotten architects left their fingerprints everywhere, but the most enduring are written in two materials. Across continents and oceans, the earliest builders lifted immense stones into deliberate patterns, circles, corridors, pyramids, mounds.
Each one seems to hum with purpose. Some point to the sunrise, some to the moon cycles.
It's as if, across the whole Earth, people were taught to use the same celestial textbook as this continues. Whether in Egypt, Britain, China, or Mesoamerica, the sky was their teacher, and the stones were their notebooks. At first glance, these alignments seem almost too perfect to be coincidence.
The Great Pyramid's sides match the cardinal directions with astonishing precision. Stonehenge frames the midsummer sunrise.
The temples of Angkor in Cambodia mirror the constellation Draco. The pyramids of Teotihuacan line up with Orion's belt.
Half a world apart, separated by oceans and millennia, the same silent conversation between...
The modern mind, comfortable with digital clocks and electric calendars, often wonders why they cared so much.
Why move millions of pounds of stone to mark the position of the sun on one day of the year?
Why carve celestial maps into caves or build observatories from boulders? The answer may be simpler and deeper than we expect. To those early civilizations, the sky wasn't just a backdrop. It was a guide, a clock, a mirror, as this continues.
And perhaps a memory of the teachers who first taught them to look up.
Imagine a time when there were no artificial lights, no city haze, no barriers between people in the night. The stars would have been overwhelming, countless, clear, infinite. To study them was to find order in chaos.
The slow dance of the planets, the steady return of certain constellations, the rare flash of a comet.
These patterns would have felt like messages from the universe itself, as this continues.
But what if, for some, they weren't just natural rhythms to be admired?
What if they were reminders of a teaching once given, a way of marking time and place that linked heaven and earth in one design?
Consider how knowledge often hides inside ritual. The people who built Stonehenge didn't just raise stones.
They gathered there to observe, to mark moments, to remember. And it might have been celebration, it might have been worship.
But beneath the ceremony was a scientific core. They had calculated the tilt of the earth, the movement of the sun, the rhythm of the seasons. In those measurements lay survival. When to plant, when to harvest, when the herds would move.
But perhaps there was also nostalgia, a sense of carrying on a tradition older than their language.
A tradition taught by the first to watch the stars with intention, as this continues.
In the deserts of Egypt, that same impulse became monumental. The builders of the pyramids oriented them not just to the compass, but to the stars. The shafts inside the Great Pyramid point directly to the ancient positions of Orion and Sirius, two of the brightest and most mythically charged stars in human memory, as this continues.
The Egyptians believed their gods came from those constellations, but perhaps the story began as something more practical.
A way of aligning their calendar to celestial cycles over time as memory faded and the instructions became worship. It's easy to see how knowledge turns into myth when time passes long enough.
The facts remain, but their meanings drift, reshaped by story and faith as this continues.
The same pattern appears far from the Nile. In Mesoamerica, the Maya built cities that functioned as vast observatories.
The temple at Chichen Itza casts a serpent-shaped shadow on the equinox, a perfect interplay of light and architecture.
That could only come from careful astronomical study. To achieve that, they had to know not only the movement of the sun,
but the tilt of the Earth and the geometry of the horizon. And they weren't alone.
The builders of Teotihuacan centuries earlier had aligned their city's main avenue with the setting of the Pleiades, a cluster of stars linked to agricultural timing. Once again, knowledge wrapped itself in story, and science became ritual. All over the world, the same pattern repeats. At Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, a stone circle predating Stonehenge,
by thousands of years, marks the rising of the summer solstice sun as this continues.
In the ruins of Machu Picchu, windows line up perfectly with the solstices.
While nearby at the Intihuatana stone, often called the hitching post of the sun, shadows disappear entirely at midday,
suggesting the builders were tracking solar zeniths with precision as this continues.
Even in far northern Europe, at sites like Newgrange in Ireland, the dawn sunlight on the winter solstice
illuminating carvings of spirals and circles that may represent celestial cycles as this continues.
How could so many different peoples, separated by oceans and ages, all have built the same kind of monuments for the same kind of purpose?
Coincidence is possible, but the pattern feels almost too coordinated as this continues.
Some researchers propose that knowledge traveled, that long before our recorded civilization, seafarers
leaving behind not just tools or genes, but a shared understanding of the cosmos as this continues.
Others argue that any intelligent people observing the same sky would naturally come to similar conclusions.
Both may be true, but it's hard not to feel that faint echo of instruction, that whisper of something older echoing through their work.
The stones don't just mark time, they also carry emotion. The act of lifting them, carving them, and aligning them.
It wasn't only about observation, it was about belonging as this continues.
To look at the heavens and see meaning is to feel part of something larger, to sense that the world is connected. The ancient East Asian builders might have felt that they were not only recording the stars, but recreating their patterns on Earth.
As if to make the planet itself a reflection of the sky, temples became mirrors, cities became constellations.
The phrase, "as above, so below," which appears in texts thousands of years later, might have begun as an intuitive truth. A recognition that the same order governs both star. This idea should celestial one. The Chinese built their ancient capitals according to the pole star's position. The Egyptians placed their pyramids to reflect Orion's belt. The Inca lined their sacred sites with the Milky Way's curves. Even the mound builders of North America, it's as though humanity, wherever it awoke to awareness, instinctively tried to write the sky upon the land.
To make knowledge visible, permanent, and grounded as this continues. It's worth remembering how much patience this required. Without telescopes, without clocks,
without metal tools. They watched and measured with nothing but eyes and persistence as this continues.
A complete lunar cycle takes nearly 19 years to repeat. Some alignments, like those tracking Venus or the precession of the equinoxes, span centuries. That means someone had to start an observation knowing they'll never see it finished, trusting the next generation to continue.
That's not just science. That's faith, not in gods, but in learning itself.
And that perhaps is the true meaning of those echoes in stone and sky, as this continues.
They are not messages from another world, but from another time.
Keep watching, keep measuring, keep passing this on.
Every alignment is a conversation across ages between the builders and those who would someday rediscover their work.
When modern Caucasian astronomers calculate the exact dates those monuments tracked.
When we use satellites to confirm their alignments, we're answering a question that was asked thousands of years ago.
Sometimes the echoes are even more literal. The acoustic properties of ancient sites often seem intentionally designed.
The Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza reflects sound waves so precisely that a clap at one end produces multiple.
To the people who built them, sound, like light, was another kind of connection between earth and sky.
Vibration as language, resonance as remembrance, as this continues.
It's easy to see why later generations interpreted all this as divine.
When you stand inside such a place and feel the air hum with alignment.
When the first beam of sunlight pierces the chamber on the solstice, or the stars line up perfectly with carved markers. It feels like the universe itself is speaking.
The rational mind today calls it astronomy, engineering, geometry.
But the human heart, even now, calls it wonder, as this continues.
And perhaps that's exactly what the first teachers wanted us to feel.
Not obedience, but awe. A curiosity so deep it keeps us looking up forever. Over the centuries, as languages shifted and empires rose and fell, the memory of why those structures were built began to fade.
The builders' names were lost, their measurements turned into myths, their symbols into religion.
A solar calendar became a tale of sun gods. An astronomical chart became a myth of serpents and dragons in the sky.
Knowledge transformed into story, because story is how the human mind remembers best.
The science survived, disguised as legend, and that's how knowledge hides, not by vanishing, but by changing shape.
In that sense, the stones are not relics. They're participants.
They continue the conversation quietly, century after century.
Every time someone looks at them and wonders, they fulfill their purpose again. The echo travels forward, touching new minds.
That's the beauty of ancient knowledge. It doesn't demand faith, only curiosity.
You don't have to believe in it, you only have to notice it.
Sometimes the sky returns the favor. The stars those ancient builders tracked have moved slightly over the millennia,
shifting with the slow wobble of Earth's axis as this continues.
When we compare their alignments to the stars as they are now, we can calculate exactly when those monuments were built. It's as if the sky itself is keeping their memory, preserving timestamps written in light. The teachers may have been forgotten, but their calendar still ticks on above us. Perhaps that's the true legacy of the first civilization. Not technology or wealth, but the habit of watching.
The art of noticing. The same curiosity that drove them to carve stone and measure shadows still drives us to build telescopes.
And to send probes into space. We still use the sky to orient ourselves.
Though now the stars we measure are light years away rather than seasons apart.
Our questions haven't changed much. Only our instruments have.
If the first teachers could see what we've built, satellites tracing orbits, telescopes reading the birth of galaxies, they might recognize the pattern immediately, not because we've surpassed them, but because we've continued their work.
The stones they lifted were our first observatories. The stories they told became our first equations.
The echo they sent into the future has reached us, and in answering it, we send our own echo forward into the centuries to come.
It's humbling to think that every human generation stands under the same sky, sees the same constellations, feels the same pull to understand.